Stephanie Crain. Stephanie and I, believe it or not, she interviewed me in 2011 when I was not living here. I was coming down here because I was dating somebody. That's another story. And I was working up in Minnesota, but I wanted to find a job down here so I could move down here. And Stephanie was working for a company, and we kind of hit it off, and we kept in touch with, LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. She has a wonderful tool on her website, which is geared kind of if you're still working. It's kind of what I would call your personal, professional, or corporate brand. So I took that test this morning, and of course she knew right away what I was. But that's kind of fun. And she's going to talk about, we're going to be a beta group, which means we're a group of people that she's using as kind of a final test run of a whole new tool. She's going to talk about that, but I think she'll have some good ideas about how we can deal with the incredible ambiguity and all that. So thank you, Stephanie, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate that introduction, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak with such a dynamic and adventurous group of women about something that I think we need to be adventurous about, change. And I came to this conversation, and originally I had titled my presentation Moving from Reaction to Response. And as I started working on what I wanted to talk to you about and what this conversation needed to look like, I realized that needed to change. It was too limiting. And so even though I marketed it one way, I took it upon myself to make a change. And now we will be mastering the art of impermanence. And doesn't that sound so much more empowering?
Yes.
Right? Like to master the art of impermanence, okay? Because we're still going to talk about reaction and response, but we're also going to learn how to navigate change with clarity and conviction, courage and intention, and how to move through those very uncomfortable situations sometimes towards possibility and opportunity in our lives. Radiating so much energy. So let's talk about change. This right here, it's just a brief overview of the conversation that I want to have with you. We're going to navigate a little bit about how we can alchemize change, how we can learn to move through it, and even some resources. But I'm a little bit of a shadow worker, and I like to start in the dark spaces. So I thought we would start with the threats. Right? Why is change so threatening right now? So, for most of us, we naturally fear change. We're conditioned to do it. And in reality, there's safety in structure and stability, right? There's consistency in how we manage our worlds through dependable systems, reliable outcomes, things that we can trust and that we know are true. So when we think about change instinctively, this is what we're protecting. We're protecting our safety, our stability, and our sense of control in the world. Because change is really driven by chaos energy, and most of us don't like to deal with that. We try to avoid it, or we're taught to avoid it. That conditioning has a real effect on how we then navigate it throughout our lives. So what we start with in the beginning only amplifies more, becomes more rigid. And if you're taught to fear change early, or if you're taught that it's disruptive, as you age, you kind of walk into those beliefs. There's a few reasons, though, why I think change has become more than just uncomfortable for us. I think it's become truly threatening in our lives. And for those reasons, a lot of people are trying to avoid change. They're trying to keep things status quo, even though we know change is necessary. So let's take a moment and look at some of the things that are actually threatening us the most. I think the first one is sort of the obvious AI elephant in the room, and that is the acceleration of technology. You mentioned child of the 70s, child of the 60s. We came into a world where we started off analog, and then technology was just introduced to us over time. And each iteration of technology became more rapid. And so first we have the internet, and now we can look up information, and then that moves into social media, and now we can see each other, and we have all of this connectivity, and all of this continues to amplify with more and more ways to communicate until we have this tool called AI that is entering our lives faster than most of us can comprehend. And the truth is that adults 50 and older are adopting AI more rapidly than any other group in our society. And at the same time, they're also developing the level of mistrust that it might deserve. But how does that impact us when we have to evolve in a changing system? Ultimately, our ability to process all of that information becomes extremely taxing on our central nervous system. And some of us want to avoid it, and some of us want to dive all the way into it. And both can be a risk, right? Not learning the tool at all can put you at a deficit. Diving all the way in has an entire risk of presentation that I could give you next time we talk. But the reality is that just that acceleration alone can make us reticent to wanting to change and move forward. So, another reason change feels so threatening many of y'all have an untrained technician.
Not that I can snap my fingers.
You'll understand, and it'll be okay. Another reason that change feels so threatening right now is visibility pressure. You know, whether you are on social media, whether you're an active professional engaging with the public, whether you're just a private individual wanting to live a private life, I think that we're all hyper aware of visibility in our lives right now. You can't literally walk down a street without being captured by 100 different cameras at 100 different angles. Right now, 30 or 40 people could film me, you know, and at any time we have that potential of just simply being visible while present, whether we want to or not. Wait, I don't know if anybody watched the Super Bowl or heard about the new Ring, you know, or the new Ring tool where they're gonna, you know, save our dogs and our pets because we're all gonna be monitored. And how you feel about that monitoring, you know, that's different for all people, but it's something to be aware of. And if you're engaged in social media, then that visibility becomes even more heightened because you're there, you're observing what other people are curating and what they're putting out about their lives. And it becomes really difficult to truly separate, even though we can intellectually know that that's curated content, we intellectually know this is just a fragment of what somebody wants us to see about themselves, we are still conditioned to internalize that knowledge, that information, to question ourselves, to question our own value and our own worth in comparison to what somebody else is presenting. So again, that heightened visibility pressure, how does that affect you making a change? Well, if you care about what other people think about what you're doing, you might just stay in status quo. You might not leave that bad relationship. You might not leave that shitty job. You might just continue to do the same thing because you don't want to be judged for making a choice. You might not dye your hair purple because purple is political. It's a statement. You know, making changes in our lives takes a certain amount of courage. And when we add the pressure of visibility on top of how we're already judging ourselves, it makes it very hard to move through that courage. So I encourage people to not care. What people think about me, none of my business at all, right? What matters is what I think about me, and I make my changes accordingly. Another thing that I think really impacts us and the way that we are threatened by change. Identity instability. Well, what do I mean by identity instability? We like to be defined. We like things to be clearly defined. We like to know what things mean. This is important. If anybody in this room has ever taken a personality test, knows what your astrology sign is, or knows your Myers-Briggs numbers, could you please raise your hand right now? We want to know more about who we are. We're curious, and we're looking for those definitions that make sense, that resonate, that help us be more connected to our identity and our sense of self. And this also happens through our belief systems. But what happens when we live in a world that is changing so rapidly that even the way that we define things and look at things are changing? What happens when you've attached yourself to a belief system and that system changes? How does it impact you individually? How does it impact us as a community? As individuals, we don't have that many choices. We can adopt the change. Be like, oh yeah, that works. I flow right with that. That change works for me. We can fight the change. Hell no. That's not me. I'm holding on tight. I will not change. I am a Luddite. I am not using technology. Try hard as it. Or we can do something else. We can just make a whole different change. Like, those are options that we have for ourselves. I have a real social example of this. I don't know if anybody in here is named or knows somebody named Karen. Me. But if you do, and you are, I can assure you, if you ask that person how they feel about the cultural shift around their name, they'll have a response. And those responses may all be very different. I had, one friend tell me, yeah, I don't care. I don't Karen. IDGAF. And another friend that was traumatized. Her identity was assaulted. And she, rightfully so, having to defend her name. I had another friend who changed her name entirely. I'm not going to deal with it. But that's a real shift. That's something, it just happened. Culture designated it, and people had to decide how they were going to respond to that change, because the change was there. The change was there. Here's an important question that really lives beneath the fear of change. What parts of myself are still attached to certainty? What are you certain about? Always going to be true. Those are the parts to look at. Those are the parts to go deeper. So how do we learn to alchemize change? I'm going to have to refer to my notes here. With change, we want to understand how to alchemize or transmute and turn something that is very anxiety-driven into something that is powerful and transformative. But what happens when change is really traumatic or unexpected? I'm certain that most of you, or all of you in this room, have had changes in your life that were painful, that created a before and an after, that created something that you had to process, that forced change, whether you wanted it or not. For me, that change occurred in October of 2015 with the flood of my home. And I chose this particular story purposefully because I know so many people in our community have been devastatingly impacted by flooding. And this happened over 10 years ago. And I'm traumatized every time I see a new flood happen. But our flood was a silent flood. That October had been unbelievable. I think we got over 20 inches of rain that October. And in the middle of the month, there had been actually really horrific flooding that had happened. This was also the same year of the Fredericksburg, or the floods that happened in May that took the house with the family. So this year for us in Central Texas had been just very tragic. But we had made it through all of these thunderstorms and lightning and LCRA alerts and non-stop, like, constant fear and anxiety. And it was the night before Halloween, and it was quiet. There was no rain. The skies were completely clear. No rain on the horizon. And Halloween's like one of our favorite holidays. Me and my husband were watching Hocus Pocus, my favorite scary movie. And all of a sudden, my husband looked down and realized there's water on our living room floor. And it's like 10:15 at night. And we look out at the same time and we see that our house is surrounded by 2 feet of river. That night, they had unleashed all of the dams upstream. They gave no LCRA warnings. They didn't tell us it was happening.
Man-made.
Our river rose to 39 feet, the highest in recorded history. This is after it's receding. It actually went 6 feet into our home.
Wow.
And that night, for us, everything changed. You know, we lost, in physical terms, we lost everything we owned. Our house was demolished. But we were alive. We were physically okay. I didn't say it at the beginning, but I meant to. I want to speak this story with gratitude. We came away with so much. Not everybody gets to come away with so much. It was a few months after the event when, you can go to the next slide. It was a few months after the event when I had this realization. You know, we had been processing the loss, we had been processing these items, and then all of a sudden I realized, you know, I'm a graphic designer and a professional marketer by trade, and I'm also an artist and a creative. And it hit me like I had just blocked it out of my mind. I lost everything I ever created. I lost all my portfolios, my entire professional work, proof, validation that I existed, all the things I hid that were special and beautiful that should have been published. Everything was gone. The backups were gone. Nothing was there. And that was the most devastating moment for me, that recognition. And I fell to the floor in grief. And very quickly my grief became anger, became rage. I couldn't believe how unfair it was. Like, it seemed like bullshit. That's how I felt. I was mad at myself for how many things I didn't protect, for the things that I hid and didn't share. They were just gone. They could never be recreated. And I was mad at the river. How could the river do that to me? Except that was the problem. I loved the river. I love nature. I couldn't be mad at the river. It took some time, and I started to go down to the river. I started to go and visit it. And at first it was really hard. It was terrifying. The water had receded and the river was back to its usual self, but I wasn't. And I would scream, I would cry, I would speak poetry into the river and tell it my stories. And eventually I started to ritualize my ritual. And each day I would draw, I would find like little stones, and I would make a little heart out of the stones. And I would just wait to see how long they would stay. I'd put them close enough to the water, but on dry land. And sometimes they would stay there, the heart would be there for weeks, and sometimes it would be gone like the next day, you know? And I just would meditate on this ideal of impermanence, of things that just are meant to transition, to transpire, to pass. Things we're not meant to hold on to. Meditate on the things that we hold on to too tightly. For me, the loss was the catalyst for change. It gave me permission to feel and express fearlessly. It actually insisted that I do that it wouldn't accept anything else. And so I began to publish, I began to create, I began to produce, and I began to reclaim and heal in that change. So, impermanence is more than just loss. It's really, I learned 3 very powerful things in that process. One is that impermanence itself is a relationship, that the act of loss, it's a relationship, it's not an event. The flood didn't happen to me. The flood just happened. It was just a flood. How I responded to it, my relationship to that event, that is what determined my capacity to figure out how to live and thrive, or just simply survive. And I had that responsibility. It taught me about coexistence, that grief and beauty exist right next to each other. They hold each other closely. That sometimes the most painful things that we experience teach us the most beautiful things about ourselves. Nothing breaks easy. We see all of this change happening in the world, and we want to try to understand it and make sense of it. But what makes sense is that there are things that need to be broken. There are things that need to change. Nothing breaks easy. It also taught me about agency versus control. Because in the end, what gave me the most agency in my life was releasing control. Was not trying to hold on so tightly to everything. To challenge my beliefs. To just look at things through a new lens. Which brings us to an important question. And that is, what are you trying to make permanent that doesn't need to be permanent? Sometimes we just get caught up in the comfort of permanency. But that becomes rigidity, stagnancy. Neither are good. There's no movement in those spaces. Some things are everlasting, but not everything is meant to be that way. So let's talk about looking at change through a modern lens. And I think in a way, it seems like if we're in this modern space and change is always happening, then it would be really easy for us to just look at change and do it in lightning ways, right? Because change is change. And the reality of that is we don't. Like I said earlier, we learn our relationship with change at a very early age. And no matter how much change propels exciting new opportunities or new potential in our lives or new conveniences, things to make things easier, whatever it is, or maybe complete and total disruption, we're going to look at change with the relationship that we've been developing with it for our whole life. So it's worth looking at a new way to look at change. So what if instead of thinking that AI and technology were going to be the destruction of all humanity and the human race, what if we saw it as a way to test our own adaptability and our own values? What if we used it as a way to respond? And I have a real strong opinion about AI. I do use AI. I use it in very intentional ways. But I do deeply believe that all good people should use all good tools, because if not, only bad people will use those tools and make them bad. So we have a responsibility in this space to understand what is impacting us so greatly. And even if you aren't impacted individually, I assure you, your family members, children, grandchildren, peers, companions, friends, they're impacted. And ignorance doesn't help us in that process. So what if we approached it with curiosity instead of fear? What if we looked at what gifts it offered us instead of just pushing it away? Culture. Culture is changing rapidly. It almost doesn't make sense anymore sometimes. And I think that all of us have that sense of dissonance, right? Where the things that used to be, the rituals that we used to all follow, they've all shifted. But what if we shifted with the culture? What if instead of tying ourselves to rigid maps and tired scripts, we rewrote the story? We created visions and journeys that we shared. We found and discovered new truths. All of that is possible to change. In the same way that destruction is possible, creation is possible. They balance each other. And our identities. What if instead of being defined by what we produce as a product, we were defined by how aligned we were and the participation and contributions we made in intangible ways that have great power, that impact our societies, that impact our communities? What if our identities could expand and instead of being defined, they could really be honored? That would be an amazing experience. I have it written right here. The people who struggle the most with change are not the least capable. They are the most attached to who they used to be, to their identity. And examining that and understanding that is a step towards releasing some of the fear that keeps you in that stagnated place. Now I'm going to tell you a personal story. This is a change of my own making. I am Stephanie Crain, but I am also Corporate Mystic. And I became Corporate Mystic several years ago. I was breaking out of my corporate job and I was becoming a consultant, and I wanted something that was cool, that would differentiate me from just a consultant or a strategist. And I also wanted something that honored my identity and who I was. And after decades of giving private tarot card reads and corporate offices, I just expressed my capacity to work in very traditional environments and bring very esoteric ideas to problem solving in culture. When I decided to move into social media, Corporate Mystic was a natural thing to go with. I started off as Top is Innovation, you can see that up there, and I had 222 followers when I decided to start posting on social media. And that was in September of 2023. And at that time, I hired a small team to work with me and help me develop my social media strategy. And like everybody who wants to change the world, I had a really simple goal I was going to change all of corporate toxicity in America. I knew it. I was going to write a book, I was going to do social media, I was going to talk to people, and I was going to make all the angry people happy. That was my goal, okay? And so I set out to do it. And within about 3 months, I had one of my reels went viral. And I don't know, maybe anybody in this room has experienced this, but it is a very surreal experience to all of a sudden wake up and each day you're getting thousands of followers every day. And within less than a month, I had 100,000 followers. And I was reaching people literally all over the world. And that number just continued to grow and expand. And it was an amazing experience. It felt successful. It felt like I was doing the right thing. But what happens when success stops feeling like success? I came from the world of marketing and branding, and all of my career I had spent bringing people together in joyful collaboration to do creative and innovative things. And that was where my skills were. I once got admonished by my boss because my team was expressing too much joy. That's a real story. It's a real story. We were causing disruption for the people around us because they weren't happy. And they couldn't understand how we were doing so well at our jobs. And so it was this energy that brought me into this space of knowing I could transform, because eventually that environment became joyful. We didn't adapt to them. They adapted to us. But here I was talking about crappy bosses and crappy corporate culture, and I'll be damned if I did not manifest toxicity directly into my life. Directly into my life. And I was talking to all the wrong people. Not the people I wanted to be talking to, but it wasn't the audience that needed to change. It was me. It was a very sobering reality to recognize my messaging was off. I had started off this path, and it's just like in woodworking when they're like, measure twice, cut once, right? Because if you don't do that and you're off like that much at the beginning, and then at the end, it's like that big, and you're like, whoa, I sawed a wedge. And that's what I did. I sawed a wedge into my business. And so I did something that a lot of people maybe thought was sudden or counterintuitive. I stopped immediately. I had the awareness and I stopped posting. I was posting 48 posts a month. Every single day, 2 posts a day, except Sundays. And I stopped posting entirely. And you know what? This is my sad ego story. Like, nobody missed me, right? Because this is like the world that we live in, right? I wasn't getting what I needed. And I wasn't taking the right actions. This is the truth about everything in the world. If you want change in the world, you have to begin with yourself, right? You'll drive yourself insane changing other people, because you won't. That will never occur. And it's really, really difficult when you have external feedback telling you you're doing everything right. I was achieving goals. I had 240. Somebody recognized me at a restaurant one time when I was ordering food, and they were like, oh, you're the corporate mystic. And I was like, I'm the corporate mystic. It was very, very surreal. But there was a misalignment. And one thing I've learned throughout my entire life is that no matter what external validation I'm receiving, if I am misaligned internally, I am creating emotional dissonance with myself. I am becoming separate from who I am. And that is the awakening. That's the moment of awareness that says, hey, nobody's gonna come save me. I'm the one that has to make this change. I'm the one that has to own. Take responsibility. Be accountable to the choices I made, and be accountable to what I'm trying to accomplish, to my purpose. So there's a question beneath the fear. What happens when the thing that worked stops working? I mean, my story was about my business, and sure, I'm adapting strategy, I'm talking about the things that are important to me. But this could be a relationship, this could be patterns in your life, self-care, spiritual beliefs, political beliefs, technology skills. It could be anything in your life that once served you and now it doesn't. It just doesn't serve you anymore. But you know what? It's a part of your identity. You're attached to it. So what do you do about that? How do you navigate the emotional dissonance and then move forward? See, this was the original title. From reaction to see what all we would have missed out on if I would have just started here. But that is the key, is really being in a place where instead of just reacting, our default mechanisms, that conditioning that we have built into us, that we've relied on, that's worked for us for so long, and it's not really working anymore. And now we need to respond to change because it's happening faster and it's happening more and it's affecting our lives. And we are empowered, strong women, and we can navigate change with grace and intention and courage and conviction. But what are some ways that what are some things we can do to help us with that? These are some tools that I use. They're super simple. They may seem very intuitive or even obvious, but my experience with super simple, very intuitive, even obvious tools is that most people don't take the time to do them. We live in a hyper busy world. We are always in a position of next, doing more. But sometimes we really do need to slow down and give ourselves that space to navigate change, because change really doesn't want to happen as fast as it seems to. So one thing I love to do is possibility expansion. One thing that fear of change does is it eliminates possibility. It eliminates opportunity. Because when we live in that space of fear, we can only see what we think we know, and there's nothing else that's going to break through that. So possibility expansion, you can do a vision board, you can journal, to me, possibility expansion is the opportunity to be creative and collaborate with myself. And here's the key about collaboration with anybody, right? When we collaborate, it comes without judgment, right? Because that early stage of brainstorming and collaboration requires that objectivity and freedom of spirit to really, really express itself and expand. And so when we collaborate with ourselves, we do that without judgment. And we create, what are the possibilities? What's the most insane thing I could think of? And then vision that. Because that outcome, that may not matter. But the journey that would take you to that outcome may take you exactly to the place that you didn't know that you needed to go. And without being able to see that far into the distance and allow yourself just the expansion, you'll stay stuck. You'll hold yourself in place. It'll be harder to take a step forward. Second thing I do, and I do it all the time, I'll do it after this session, belief examination. I am always challenging my beliefs. Beliefs work best when they're fluid. Beliefs work best when they guide us towards knowledge, when they enhance our ability to understand both ourselves and the world around us. Beliefs harm us when they hold us in a place of certainty. If you are certain about your belief, I urge you to at least examine the certainty. You don't have to change the way you believe. Nobody does. But if you need to change a belief and you're not willing to examine that, it's going to continue to show up in your life in different ways. And eventually you will be asked in one form or another to take a closer look. And it might happen in ways that you don't want. in ways that don't feel so comfortable. Release rituals. This is one of those things that I really don't think people take the time to do. Maybe you do. Maybe all of you are writing down bad things and burning them and doing some sage and whatever. But I think most people don't take the time to release painful energy, angry energy. We repress it, we compress it, and you know what happens with all of that compressed energy? We either become highly passive aggressive or we hurt ourselves. We become sick. We become ill, and it becomes harder and harder to truly heal through pain. So, my heart on the beach, that's a release ritual. You can write something down and burn it. That's a release ritual. You can go outside and scream something into the sky, and that is a release ritual. The thing about ritual is it's sacred. It's a sacred contract you have with yourself. That's what makes it important. It's not magical or woo-woo or anything like that. It's a commitment and a discipline. And it's something that tells your higher self that you're seeing. You see. You're not avoiding the pain. You're honoring pain. You're honoring change. You're honoring the transition. And then my fourth practice is practicing neutrality. Luckily, I'm a Libra, and I have Libra in 6 of my houses, okay? So I can be so neutral. I can be incredibly objective about things, and I can look at things from all different perspectives, and sometimes that drives me insane because all of you could have a different point of view, and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. But in reality, neutrality is very free. I don't have to react or respond to anything until I'm ready to. I can be objective. I don't have to judge it. I don't have to get angry. I can be curious and ask more questions. I don't have to be reactive. I can be, and boy, if I am, beware. But I'm better if I take the time, if I give myself that gift. A gift of response, and that response happens, I think, more easily when we come from a place of neutrality. When we are not already set into our conditioning, our patterns, and our bias. Next. So how do we lead change without forcing change? Nobody actually, if you try to force somebody to change, what will happen? Something will happen. Most likely they will tell you something. Most likely if you try to force someone to change, they will do the exact opposite of what you're asking them to do. Right? They will avoid it and resist it at all costs. The best way to bring change about is to model the behavior that you want to see. And I believe that behavior absolutely begins with integrity. And holding that integrity for ourselves, right? Because that's where it begins. If you're not honoring who you are, it's just like that cut. It starts to get off course after a period of time. And you lose that sense of connection, that sense of connection to self. But here's what happens when we model integrity, which takes great courage. It does not come easy. Most people are much more comfortable staying silent. Most people are want to be under the radar. Maybe use introvert as an excuse. We all try to avoid this, but when we show up strong in our integrity, in our power, in our truth, people respond. They hear that. They change. You don't have to ask them to change. They start shifting on their own. You can see the discomfort, you can see the engagement, you can see everything. And that's amazing. Because that is real change. It doesn't really matter. It's not up to me what their experience is. What is my responsibility is truth, my truth, and being honest about who I am. if you have the capacity to sit in comfort with ambiguity, you should stand up right now and call yourself a leader. Because there is that, thank you. Let's give her an applause. There is really nothing more important right now that we need than the ability and capacity to navigate ambiguity, because not only do we not know all the answers, we never have and we never will. But that ambiguity, oh my God. You know, the corporate persona archetype test that Nancy mentioned on my website, it's got about 30 questions. And one of the questions that I ask is basically like, what causes you the most stress, right? And there's like 8 answers of all the, you know, like my personal life, my professional life, all these different things. The number one answer by a degree of 48% of the people who have over 4,000 people have taken this test is uncertainty and worry. The number one thing that causes, that's what's keeping us up at night. It's what's making us sick. And it's what we have the absolute least control over. But we're holding on to that. So I encourage all of you, get comfortable with ambiguity. Get comfortable with somebody not responding to your text and not knowing why. Get comfortable with not having all the answers all the time or knowing what's going to happen next.
Can I just make a comment about
Please,
that?
yeah.
When I was going through a divorce, it was probably over a decade ago, and I remember telling the therapist, I said, I'm a control freak. I said, this is like one of the few times in my life that I really don't know, I can't make sense of it, I'm not really sure where I go from here. And he said, bless you, if you are sitting in ambiguity. And he was a Buddhist. And
Good
he said, we believe that ambiguity is the best place to be. I said, why? How could that be good? He said, because when you don't know, you're not certain, is where you will have the most possibilities.
Exactly the
So
truth.
when you can sit with that ambiguity for as long as you can, he said, when you think you know, you don't know.
That's right.
When you think you don't know, you know.
That's right.
But you have to sit. And he said, and then you will know. So
And
don't try to force sense or logic. He said, because it's not about that. And I found that one of the most powerful things that anyone ever told me was to be comfortable to go and sit with ambiguity and that was okay.
It is. It's real permission. It's
Yeah.
real permission. And here's the thing. That ambiguity is uncomfortable. And that's why people don't sit with it. They want to move out of that space as quickly as possible. They want certainty. They want the answers. Think about any situation you've ever been in where you finally had to surrender and give up control. What happened up to that point? How insane did you drive yourself? How much control did you try to have over something that you had no control over? And that is what ambiguity gives you. It gives you permission to let go of that control and to really, truly and what I love about what you were describing, because I think this is the truth of us becoming more connected to self. When we let go of that space of control, that's when we really tap into our intuition. That's when we really can sense truth and we remove all those conditioning and layers and all of the things that have put us in that state of chaos, right? Ambiguity is really a gift that most people fear and avoid, which takes me to my final point, which is leading through change fearlessly. Like, it seems, these things, they all seem kind of like simple and then completely impossible, right? How can we be fearless in the face of a great change? We can't. We're all human. We're going to have fear, right? But I think it's worth examining if what you're afraid of is the right thing to fear. Sometimes we fear the wrong thing. We fear the movement instead of the stagnation. We fear the shift instead of what we know is, we've all heard about, like, you'll stay in a state of discomfort because you know the discomfort. It's the known, right? But you're not going to move into the unknown because, oh my God, what could that contain? And most of us, when we're in that state of discomfort, are already in a state of thinking the worst. And so we're going to project that into whatever that future might look like. Releasing some of that fear is a way to help others do the same. We're in a world right now where a lot of people are afraid. Some people are afraid and they don't know why. Some people have attached themselves to so much certainty that it scares them. They are afraid, and they need to see integrity, comfort with ambiguity, and fearless courage modeled for them so that they can know how to do it too. I really believe that those are the things that we can do for each other. Change integration. So how do we really bring all of these ideals together? How do we integrate change into our lives, feel more comfortable? I have to look at my notes now because we're going to read a quote. And I did good. I went so far away that I've lost my notes. And I'm not going to find my quote. But it's a Carl Jung quote. And I should know it by heart because I am a master Jungian coach. But no, that's not going to happen. So here's my quote. We cannot change anything until we accept it. Right? Condemnation does not liberate. It only oppresses. Right? So whether we're condemning our own selves, our own fear, our reticence, or whether we're looking at and judging and condemning others, right? We're working from a lower vibrational state, a state of oppression, not a state of expansion. I think that all of us know that change is necessary right now. And I think that most of us, I don't know, I tend to be an optimistic realist. I find that cynicism is the destroyer of hope. And I say it all the time, I piss people off with my joy, okay? I refuse to abscond it. I will be joyful. I will see joy every single day of my life and hold gratitude for that joy. I will honor pain just as equally because that coexistence, it occurs. So, all of you in here have a choice. Every single one of us, we get to decide, is change an obstacle or is it an opportunity? It's all in how you want to embrace it. And that's the end. Well, so this is my newest persona archetype tool, and it is really designed, it is awaken your inner phoenix, and it's where archetype meets alchemy. And the purpose, this is a really fun little quiz, but it's about transmuting pain into creativity and sort of what helps you do that best. It's fun. It takes about 5 or 7 minutes to do it. At the end of the quiz, you get full results about what your phoenix is, who your phoenix companions might be. There's some really great insights that I built into the results. And then there's also a downloadable piece, so it's all free. There's an opportunity at the end of the quiz to schedule a session with me. You're welcome to do that, but there's no pressure. You can do the quiz on your own. If you want to follow or connect with me, these are all my professional sites. My Substack site is where I put most of my personal work, most of my art and creativity, but it's always tied to these ideas that I can't seem to stop obsessing over, so.
Well, thank you, wonderful. Can we leave that up so you guys can take a picture of it and use it? Both Jeannie and I have done the professional corporate brand archetype
If you do wanna take the corporate persona test, it's on my website at taucusinnovation.com, and it pops right up when you go to the site, so it's really easy to access.
And before we leave, I just wanna say thank you to everybody in the Austin Extract community. 9 amazing years. It's all, you guys are the North Star for every group in the country. And change happens, I mean, all of us want some kind of change, but it happens. We can't count on those people at the top. It's all gonna happen here. One conversation at a time, one community group at a time, getting together, bringing more people into our community. So on behalf of Jeannie Ralston and me, Jeannie Edmonds, thank you so much.